The frost cracked under his boots like tiny bones. Each step was a punctuation mark in the silence of the early Montana morning, a sound so loud it seemed to echo off the frozen ponderosa pines. The air was a blade, sharp and clean, scented with pine sap and the brittle, sweet smell of hay. And underneath it all, the older, deeper smell of loneliness. It lived in the wood of the empty stable, in the wind that whistled through a broken board, a hollow note that had been playing on a loop in ex-Staff Sergeant Mark Rivas's own chest for over a year. What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind? The will had been simple. A savings account, a box of letters, and a horse named Pika. His cousin, Leo, gone in a flash of IED metal on a road outside Kabul, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like its own kind of explosion. Mark had inherited the echoes. He'd sold the account, stored the letters unread in a cardboard box in his rented cabin, and now, here he was, staring at a creature that was a living, breathing monument to his failure. He hadn't been there. He'd been stateside, already nursing his own invisible wounds, and he hadn't been there for Leo. He pushed the heavy stable door open, the groan of its hinges a familiar sound now. His breath plumed in the cavernous space, empty except for one occupant at the far end. He didn't want to be here. This was duty, not desire. A debt paid to a ghost. And then he saw him, really saw him. Pika stood in the cross ties, a tapestry of a past Mark could only guess at. He was an Appaloosa, but his coat was a map of violence. A blanket of white speckled with dark spots across his haunches was interrupted by a savage, hairless scar that raked from his withers down his shoulder, pale and twisted. Another, smaller and neater, a surgeon's work, bisected his left foreleg. His ears, one notched from some long-ago fight, were pinned back, and his head was held high, tense. He wasn't just a horse. He was a veteran, a war-scarred warrior, left behind in the quiet, just like Mark. Mark's own scars itched in sympathy, the phantom ache in a leg that was no longer there, the tight pull of skin grafts on his back. He leaned heavily on his cane, the polished wood cold under his palm. He and the horse studied each other from across the vast, hay-strewn distance, two broken things in a world that had moved on. "Hey, boy," Mark said, his voice a rusty gait. In the morning, quiet. Pika's head twitched. Not a friendly gesture, a warning. A deep, wary snort sent another cloud of vapor into the air. His dark eye rolled, showing a crescent of white. "I see you," that look said. "Stay over there," Mark did. He moved slowly, each step measured, his bad leg dragging a little in the dust. He wasn't afraid of the horse. He was afraid of the connection it represented, the tether to a pain he was trying to outrun. He filled the water bucket, the splash, echoing. He forked hay into the manger, the rustle of it the only conversation. Pika didn't relax. He stood like a statue, every muscle coiled, breathing in the scent of this new, limping man who carried the ghost of his old one on his clothes. Days bled into one another, a monotony of frost and chores and silence. Mark would talk, not to the horse, but to the air. He'd tell him about the weather, about the stupid price of feed, about the ache in his bones. It was easier than talking to a therapist. The horse never argued, never offered empty platitudes. He just listened, his ears flicking, his distrust a palpable wall between them. The first crack came on a morning so still the world felt held in a breath. Mark was mucking out the stall, a tedious, painful process that left him sweating and cursing under his breath. He lost his balance for a second, his cane slipping on a wet patch of straw. He caught himself on the wooden wall, a grunt of pain and frustration escaping him. He froze. Pika had flinched at the sound, but not away. He'd taken a single tentative step forward. His head was lowered now, his ears swiveling, not pinned flat but curious. The white was gone from his eye. He let out a soft, questioning blow, his nostrils flaring, heart hammering for a reason he couldn't name. Mark stayed perfectly still. He didn't reach out. He just breathed in and out, matching the slow, steady rhythm of the horse's own. Breaths. Minutes passed, measured in heartbeats and the distant call of a crow. Slowly, so slowly it was almost not a movement at all, Pika stretched his neck. He extended his head across the space between them. Mark could feel the warm, hay-scented puff of his breath on his outstretched hand. He could see the intricate patterns of the spots on his nose, the leathery texture of his muzzle. The horse sniffed his fingers, his lips brushing against the calloused skin. It wasn't affection. It was reconnaissance, an assessment of a potential threat. Mark didn't move, didn't speak. He just let himself be smelled, be seen for who he was in that moment. Not a soldier, not a cousin, not a failure. Just a man, standing in a stall, hurting. Pika's investigation ended. He didn't withdraw. He simply rested his heavy, warm head against Mark's chest, right over his pounding heart. The weight of it was immense, solid, real. It was the first real living thing that had touched him without causing pain in longer than he could remember. He could feel the coarse hair, the solid bone of the skull beneath, the incredible quiet power held in check. A pressure built behind Mark's eyes, hot and unfamiliar. He didn't cry. He just stood there, one hand braced against the wall, the other hanging uselessly at his side, while a battle-scarred horse leaned against him as if he were a pillar of strength. The chore was done. The silence settled back, but it was a different silence now. Softer. Mark turned to leave, his movements slow, his mind a whirl of something he couldn't name. He didn't look back. He made it to the stable door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the weak winter sun. He heard it then, the soft, unmistakable sound of a hoof on packed earth. Then another. He stopped, his back to the stable. He didn't need to turn around to know. Pika was there, standing at the threshold of his stall, watching him go. He hadn't followed, not yet, but he was watching. And for the first time since he'd come home, Mark Rivas didn't feel entirely alone. The thaw came, and with it, a fragile new rhythm. Mark stopped seeing the chores as a penance. The mornings became something else, a meeting. He'd arrive, and Pika would be waiting at the gate, his ears pricking forward at the sound of the truck, that one notched ear giving him a permanently quizzical look. The horse still didn't like to be touched without permission. A bridle was a negotiation. A saddle was out of the question, but he would stand for hours as Mark brushed the winter coat from his spotted hide, the currycomb moving in slow circles over the ridges of old scars. Mark talked. He talked about the dreams that still came, the ones with the dust and the noise. He talked about Leo as a boy pulling a prank that got them both grounded for a summer. He never talked about the incident that sent him home. Some wounds were too deep for words. Pika listened. He'd cock his head, his muzzle soft against Mark's shoulder as he worked. It was in these quiet moments that Mark began to notice the strange things. The way Pika would startle at the sound of a low-flying plane, his whole body tensing, his head shooting up, eyes wide with a primal fear. Not the skittishness of a normal horse. This was a memory, etched deep in muscle and bone. He'd freeze. If Mark dropped a metal feed bucket, the clatter echoing in a way that made him stand statue still, breath held for a full minute after. But the most peculiar thing was the word, the name. Leo. Mark hadn't said it aloud in months. It was a landmine in his mind. But one afternoon, he was telling a story, his voice easy, his hand running down Pika's scarred shoulder. And Leo, he just laughed, even with mud all over his. He said the name, and Pika's head snapped around. Not in fear, in recognition. His ears swiveled forward, sharp and intent. He let out a soft, low whicker, a sound Mark had never heard before. It was a question. It was an answer. It was a ghost of a sound, meant for one person. Mark's heart stuttered. He fell silent. The horse nudged his pocket where he kept the sugar cubes, but his eyes were searching Mark's face for something else entirely. The connection was so sudden, so intimate, it felt like a violation. This horse wasn't just a horse. He was a living archive of Leo. He knew the sound of his name on his person's lips. He was waiting for him to come back. The realization was a physical blow. He'd been sharing his grief with the one creature who understood it perfectly, because they had loved the same man. The weight of it, the sheer, unbearable loneliness of this animal's vigil, crashed down on him. He'd been so consumed by his own loss, he never truly considered the horses. He stumbled back, his cane sinking into the soft earth. The carefully constructed walls inside him, the ones he'd been reinforcing for a year, began to crack. The breaking point came a week later. A box arrived from Leo's mother. Things from his footlocker, she'd written. Things you might want. Mark left it on his kitchen table for 3 days, a square cardboard monument to everything he was avoiding. Finally, on a rainy evening, the sound of the drops a steady drum on the roof, he opened it. On top was a photograph. Leo grinning, his arms slung around the neck of a spotted horse. Pika. Younger, without the scars, his eyes bright. Beneath it, a stack of letters tied with string, and at the very bottom, something wrapped in an old bandana. Mark knew what it was before he unfolded the cloth. Leo's hunting knife, the bone handle worn smooth from use. He sank into a chair, the knife cold in his hand. He remembered the day Leo bought it. He remembered the letters, now realizing some of them were his own, sent from a different desert, a different war. He was holding the physical evidence of a life lived, a life lost. It was all too much, the silence of the cabin, the drumming, rain, the empty stable outside. It became a vacuum, sucking all the air from the room. A sob ripped from his throat, raw and ugly. Then another. He didn't cry. He unraveled. He laid his head on the table among the relics of his cousin's life, and wept. He wept for the boy they had been. He wept for the man Leo would never become. He wept for the leg he lost, for the friends he'd buried, for the crushing, isolating weight of being the one who came home. The storm he had been holding back for over a year broke over him, and he was lost in it, drowning in a grief so complete. It was a kind of death. Through the roaring in his ears, he heard it, a soft, insistent knock at the front door. Not a human knock, a solid, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. He ignored it, lost in his pain, but it persisted. Confused, bleary-eyed, he lifted his head. He dragged himself to the door and opened it. Pika stood there in the pouring rain. His gait was loose, something he must have nudged open himself. His dark coat was plastered to his body, water streaming down the channels of his scars. He wasn't agitated. He was just there. He stood patiently, as if he'd been waiting for Mark to answer. Their eyes met. The horse took a step forward, his large head entering the shelter of the porch. He ignored the rain, ignored the strange indoors. He simply lowered his head and pressed his wet, warm forehead against Mark's chest, exactly as he had in the stable that first time. He stood there, a solid, breathing bulwark against the storm, both the one outside and the one within. He didn't move. He didn't demand anything. He just offered his weight, his presence, his steady, slow breaths that eventually, gradually, began to sync with Mark's own ragged ones. He stayed until the tremors subsided. He stayed until the silence returned, not as an emptiness, but as a peace. Weeks later, under a high, bright sun, Mark led Pika out to the large pasture behind the stable. He didn't have a saddle. He hadn't tried to ride. That wasn't what this was about. He unclipped the lead rope. "Go on," he said, his voice quiet. "You're free." Pika looked at him, then at the open field. He took a few steps, then broke into a trot. Then something miraculous happened. He kicked up his heels, bucked playfully into the air, and exploded into a gallop. It wasn't a run of fear or panic. It was pure, unadulterated joy. He raced along the fence line, his powerful muscles stretching, his spotted coat gleaming, his mane and tail flowing like banners. He ran with a grace that made the scars on his body seem like ancient history, not definitions. He ran for the sheer pleasure of being alive. Mark watched, and a sound came out of him that was foreign. It was a laugh. It was rough and unused, like a door on rusty hinges, but it was real. It felt like coming up for air after being submerged for a lifetime. Pika heard it. He wheeled around, cantered back, and skidded to a stop in front of Mark, puffing and snorting, his eyes bright. He nudged Mark's shoulder, demanding a sugar cube, as if the breathtaking display of freedom was just a trick for a treat. As Mark fumbled in his pocket, his fingers brushed against the old bandana he now carried with him, the one that had held Leo's knife. He realized something then, with a clarity that stole his breath. He had thought he was here to take care of Leo's horse, to quiet a guilty conscience. But that wasn't it at all. Leo, in his final profound wisdom, hadn't left Mark a burden. He had left him a rescuer, a four-legged, war-scarred, sugar cube-loving rescuer who didn't need words to heal a shattered soul. He just needed to be seen. And in being seen, he made Mark feel seen, too. Sometimes the ones who carry you out of the dark are the ones no one else saw coming. If this story of a broken soldier and a battle-scarred horse found a way to heal your heart, even just a little, then do something for us. Press that subscribe button and ring the bell. We tell these stories every day, stories of quiet courage and unexpected redemption, and we don't want you to miss a single one. Leave a comment below telling us what you felt, and share this with someone who might need to remember that it's never too late to laugh again. Thank you for watching.